How's it going? Hopefully, everyone's having an awesome day. The nice, gloomy weather here in Austin, Texas. And there's a lot of things to talk about, but I'm going to talk about this particular case. I find it interesting. I find it has as a result of unintended consequences. Um, the medical companies that make the drugs to put people to sleep permanently don't want the liability, so they're not making it anymore. They're not selling it anymore. But however, crime doesn't go away. The death penalty doesn't go away. Even though this is a push for to get rid of the death penalty, states have to become creative in finding a humane way to put monsters down, which is very interesting. Don't get me wrong. Not getting into the moral debate between the death penalty or not. I'm kind of for it, but I'm also against it. I think the evidence for it has to be way beyond a shadow of doubt. They would have to have DNA, fingerprints, 10 eyewitnesses, video evidence, and all this good stuff to prove that it was the person that did it. I just don't think we're there yet. I mean, that's just my personal view. I'm for it, but I'm also against it. Hopefully that makes sense. But I'm going to go to my favorite news site, ground.news. The Supreme Court declines to halt first U.S. nitrogen gas execution in Alabama case. Kenneth Wayne Smith, as the Alabama inmate convicted of murder for hire case, awaits a last-minute decision for the federal courts to halt his execution by nitrogen gas. Alabama plans to execute Smith for using the untested method of nitrogen hypoxia. Unless blocked by the courts, Smith argued that the method may violate the constitutional ban on cruel and unusual punishment. The 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court have yet to rule on Smith's appeal to block the execution. The method is approved. It will be the first time in use of the United States. First time in use in the United States. I get it. I mean, no one really wants to go through this, but when a monster is a monster, and the only thing you do with the monster is you put it down. So I'm going to Reuters. I mean, they're center. I mean, I know that they're biased and probably not to be trusted, but I'm using them. Let's see here. By Andrew Chung, January 24th, 2024. 3:03 p.m. Central Time, updated an hour ago. Let's see here, January 24th, Reuters, the U.S. Supreme Court on Wednesday declined to halt Alabama from proceeding with the nation's first execution using nitrogen gas to carry out the death penalty of a convicted murderer, Kenneth Smith, who survived a botched lethal injection in 2022 that helped prompt a review of the state's death penalty procedures. Oh, he's for round two. The justice denied Smith's request to stay his execution, which is scheduled for Thursday, and declined to hear his legal challenge, contending that the second execution attempt by Alabama after the first failed attempt caused him severe trauma would violate the U.S. Constitution, Eighth Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment. I mean, he did the crime. Now he's got to pay the price. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with the Eighth Amendment protections against cruel and unusual punishment because sometimes you just have to be brutal to send a message. I understand why it's there, and I'm glad it's there. On a moral side, I'm glad it's there, but on a personal side, sometimes the father of a raped child just wants to do their own street justice. Sometimes that's warranted. I'm not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong, but sometimes you gotta set that example. And I'm conflicted on this one. Just say I'm just gonna say it's complicated on my position on that one. See here, no justice publicly dissented from the decision. Smith 58 is separately contesting the legality of Alabama nitrogen gas protocol on the Eighth Amendment and other grounds. Litigation could come to the Supreme Court, potentially giving the justices another opportunity to decide whether to halt the execution. Judge ruled against Smith concerning protocol on January 10th. The Atlanta-based 11th U.S. Circuit Court of the Appeals have yet ruled on Smith's appeal. Smith attorney Robert Grass declined to comment. Majority of the Supreme Court justices in 2020 cleared the way for the first attempt execution of Smith, who was sentenced to death for his role in the 1988 murder for hire. The 9-member court, 3 liberal justices dissented on the previous decision. Alabama gas method called nitrogen hypoxia was designed to deprive Smith of oxygen by placing a mask connected to the cylinder of nitrogen over his face. Smith's botched execution was the third consecutive instance which Alabama officials encountered problems or delay by inserting intravenous lines for scheduled lethal injection, with the 2 executions including Smith, eventually called off according to court filings. The problems prompted Alabama Governor Kay Ivey, a Republican, announced a review of the state's execution procedures. Officials completed a review a few months later, saying that they obtained new equipment and would add to the pool of available medical personnel for executions. Smith, in May 2023, challenged Alabama's plan for its second execution plan, asserting that the state court would violate the Eighth Amendment after the first attempt, according to his lawyer, caused him severe physical and psychological pain, including post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't care. You are part of you're a convicted murderer. You were charged with the murder of hire. I mean, I don't know the whole details, but let's see here. Alabama called. No, I read that. State officials during the first execution attempted repeatedly to try, but failed to place the necessary intravenous line or a central line in his collarbone area before calling off the execution at 11 p.m. Smith's lawyer has characterized the experience as torture and said it exposed him to severe mental anguish of a mock execution. So your lower courts in Alabama dismissed Smith's challenge. Smith's lawyer urged the U.S. Supreme Court to intervene, calling Alabama nitrogen gas protocol recently released and untested, and a novel method of execution has never been attempted by any state or federal government. Alabama Republican Attorney General Steve Marshall, in a filing, called the method perhaps the most humane method of execution ever devised. Well, the jury's still out on that. Ivey said Smith's execution take place within a 30-hour time frame beginning at 12 a.m. on Thursday and expiring at 6 a.m. the following day. Smith was convicted of killing Elizabeth Sennett, or the 1988 killing Elizabeth Sennett, after he and his accomplice were hired by her husband, Charles Sennett, a Christian minister who has taken out a large insurance policy on his wife. According to prosecutors, she was stabbed repeatedly and beaten with blunt objects. Charles Sennett was later committed suicide. What a bitch. Smith's accomplice also was convicted and sentenced to death, with execution carried out in 2010. The UN Human Rights Office, January 16th, called on Alabama to halt the planned execution, said it would be amount to torture and violates Americans' commitment under international law. Well, UN could just pound sand for all I care. U.S. states that still allow the death penalty have found it increasingly difficult to obtain barbiturates used in lethal injection execution protocols, in part because the European ban on preventing pharmaceutical companies from selling drugs to be used in execution. Alabama, Mississippi, and Oklahoma have introduced gas or new gas based products. Okay, so I was actually wrong at the beginning. It's pretty much, I guess, the ingredients come from Europe and they ban preventing pharmaceutical. Now, does that mean if it's an American based company and they do business in Europe, are they banned on providing that since they do business in Europe? I wonder if that also has an effect to it as well. These are just questions I don't have answers for, and I probably could look them up. I'm not going to. But with that being said, I thought this was an interesting article. Yeah, I don't really want to see you. Um, I just thought it was an interesting article, and I thought the whole concept behind it is interesting. Besides the point of the morality of it, of executing people, I'm conflicted on that one. I'm really am conflicted. I agree with the death penalty, but I think the evidence for it should be even higher than beyond a shadow of a doubt. I think there should be no contest, or there should be no way to say that this person didn't commit those crimes, if that makes sense. I don't know. Leave a comment down below on what your thoughts are. But most importantly, have yourself a wonderful day, morning, or evening.